Many thanks for joining us in this webinar. This is the second webinar of the series of webinars conducted by Partner Violence and Mental Health Network, which is supported by World University Network. In this webinar, Lisa Fontes is going to talk about coercive control and what can we do to support someone who is experiencing coercive control. I will hand over to Lisa. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Aronson Fontes. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Massachusetts, and I have been working for about 25 years on issues related to violence against women and children, intimate partner relationships, and particularly cultural issues as it pertains to these. In this presentation, I'm going to be answering questions that I get a lot from people about what to do if they have a family member or friend who's being subject to coercive control or domestic violence. And I'm going to give some tips, and we'll just begin right away. So let's see. And there's my book, Invisible Chains, Overcoming Coercive Control in Your Intimate Relationship. And that has a chapter especially directed to friends and family of people who are being victimized. And it explains coercive control. So I get contacted a lot by people who are concerned about a brother, a sister, their mother, their daughter, who is in a coercive control relationship. They want to rescue that person. They're very worried about them. And I hope through this video to give some people ideas about what they can do. So the plan for our brief time together is that I'm going to briefly describe coercive control, and then I'm going to review some of the main tactics of coercive control and speak about how you can counteract the effects of those tactics. And I will review some of the questions at the end. First of all, I want to thank Evan Stark. Evan Stark wrote the first book on coercive control, How Men Entrap Women in Personal Life. It's a brilliant book. It's a path-breaking book. And all of us who write about coercive control now really follow in his footsteps, and he continues to do brilliant work in this regard. And he's an excellent thinker and a wonderful friend, and I thank him. So the traditional model of looking at domestic violence considers the problem to be episodes of physical violence. And this approach made sense in the 1980s when we were really trying to get the police and the courts to take seriously if a woman gets her face smashed in at home, or a broken bone, or bruises, if she's assaulted at home, that is a serious assault. And so we emphasized the physical violence aspect of domestic violence. And in the popular imagination now, people think about domestic violence or domestic abuse as being these episodes of violence. The coercive control perspective looks at it a little bit differently. It says there's a whole universe of ways in which a controlling person, abusive person, controls their partner. And just one of them is episodes of violence. But if, let's say, an episode of violence is reported on January 1st and another episode of violence is reported on August 1st, it's not that nothing else happened in those 8 months. There's a whole universe of abusive acts that happened, and those are important too. So coercive control is a strategy that some people use to control their partners and maintain their privileges. What privileges? Access to sex, access to house cleaning, access to childcare, maybe access to their partner's income, to their companionship. You can see coercive control in other settings where one person can have a lot of control over another, such as in the military, in sports, sometimes with trainers and coaches and their athletes, in work situations. The elderly and people with disabilities can be dependent on their abusive caretakers who may use coercive control with them. I think today we're going to focus just on intimate partners. The intimate partner relationship is kind of special because we imbue it with all of our hopes and dreams, all of our notions of romance. Also, often people have 24/7 access to their intimate partners. Coercive control does exist in some same-sex couples, And people of all genders can be victimized or victimizers. Most commonly, we're talking about a man dominating his female partner, but it can work in all kinds of directions. So the controlling behaviors that form part of this strategy of domination include isolating, sexual coercion, intimidating, economic control, degrading, stalking, physically abusing, manipulating, controlling through children, and micromanaging. Coercive control is everything that happens between assaults. And it's worth saying that there aren't always physical assaults present. There may just be coercive control. So the first tactic, and I think in many ways the most important one, is isolation. Abusers try to isolate their victims from their family, from friends, and from coworkers. They may make them lose their jobs or may make them run home after their jobs, not allow them to socialize in normal ways with their colleagues. They may be texting them all day if they are at work or emailing them so they can't feel or pop into their workplace unannounced. And so they may not feel comfortable at work. Sometimes people are even forced to have the camera on their phone on all day, showing what they're doing to their abuser. So even if they are in the workplace, they may not be free. They can separate the victim from their family by being drunk every time the family comes over, or by bad-mouthing their friends to the victim, or bad-mouthing the victim to the friends, so that it just becomes too much trouble to go out. Let's say I want to go out on Saturday to see my sister, and my abuser says, I don't care. And then I come home and the abuser says, is nasty and is doing the silent treatment with me. And I say, you said it was okay. And he says, well, you chose to be with her rather than me. And he's disagreeable for the rest of the weekend. Well, I'm probably going to think twice about going out. And therefore I end up being extra isolated. When people are isolated by coercive control and don't have meaningful contact with others, they're more vulnerable to the partner's abuse and to their control. So one important thing you can do as a friend or family member of somebody who's subject to coercive control is counteract that isolation. Stay in touch or get back in touch somehow, whatever that means. It might mean texting, it might mean emailing, it might be friending on Facebook, it might be dropping by their house or sending a letter. Just make sure that whatever you're doing is not putting that person at risk. And so your messages should probably be light and friendly and not contain content which could put them at risk. Encourage them to participate in activities outside the home, and the abuser is probably going to try to limit these or prohibit them. So it could be going to a religious institution, it could be going to their children's school, going for a walk with a friend on a daily basis, or doing some kind of exercise. Enjoy good times with them. Let them enjoy good times with you. Your times together should not be heavy and about arguing about whether there's abuse, whether there's danger. Let them have a place and a space to breathe freely and to feel like themselves again. This is really important. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is an abusive technique to make a person feel crazy or seem crazy to others, or get treated like a crazy and unwell and unbalanced person. There are many techniques of gaslighting. It can include hiding things. I know a woman who had all her children's important papers and her important papers in her family safe, and her husband went in, took them out, and then when she went to get them and couldn't find them, he blamed her and said she was irresponsible and why couldn't she keep track of things? And she felt like she was losing her mind because she knew she'd put them there, but they weren't there. So that was kind of crazy making. Spreading rumors about someone can make them feel crazy. If you call their friends and say, oh, just keep an eye on Jane, she seems a little unwell. Then next time you see Jane, she may look at you funny and you don't know what's going on. And so that can make you feel crazy. Denying reality. I never said that. I never did that. That didn't happen when it clearly did. that can make someone feel crazy. And it's incessant, it's day in, day out. And so you really can start feeling like you're losing your mind. Blaming the victim for things they didn't do. The car is smashed. You must have gotten in an accident. Well, the abuser knows that the abuser got in an accident, but the victim is blamed and then wonders, if they forgot something or lost consciousness for some period. I'll tell you a little story. Someone contacted me saying that her husband had put fillings in her teeth that were recording all her conversations. And she had gone to several dentists to ask them to remove them for this reason. And the dentist told her that she should see a psychiatrist. And a psychiatrist told her that she must be schizophrenic. So I listened to this story, and my guess is that her abuser actually had a listening device installed, or an app installed on her phone and or her computer, or perhaps elsewhere in the house. So she really felt that he could hear all her conversations, and he had told her that he was listening through her feelings. Well, that certainly makes her say something which sounds very crazy, but there's a different explanation. But he provided her with kind of a crazy making explanation, which made everybody look at her as if she was imbalanced. So how can you counteract gaslighting? Affirm the perspectives of the person who's being gaslit. I get it. I understand. I know what you're talking about. Reminisce in ways that remind them of who they are. Oh, do you remember when we did this? And do you remember how much fun we had doing that? And I really enjoyed it when we did this. Because when you're in a coercive control relationship, sometimes you look in the mirror and you can't even see yourself there. You wonder, what's become of me? What's become of that person I was before? Where did she go? So those stories can help that person reconnect with who they really are. Try to resist the temptation to lecture. As a friend or family member, listen more than you talk. Give them an opportunity to speak. Hear them. Tell them you understand what they're saying. Try to remain non-judgmental about their choices perhaps to stay with the abuser. There may be more going on than you realize. Reassure them that the abuse is not their fault. Abusers blame their victims. If you hadn't said such and such, if you hadn't given me a hard time, if you hadn't nagged, if you hadn't stopped to talk with somebody, then I wouldn't have had to do this. And so it's important to just keep reassuring, if they do talk about the abuse, reassuring them that that response was a choice that the abuser made. The third tactic, which I'm going to talk about, is degrading, so that an abuser will criticize, humiliate their partner in order to make them lose their self-confidence, lose their self-esteem, and feel unworthy. A lot of times abusers will insist on rituals related to food. You can eat this, you can't eat that. You have to eat in this way. You have to eat in that time. You have to lose weight. You have to gain weight. You're disgusting. There are often rituals related to their body about how they clean themselves, related to sex and related to obedience. You can't shower all week because of what you just said. And this kind of very intimate control of one's body, even rituals around using the toilet, make a person feel like they don't have control even of their bodies, their most basic functions, that they're entirely colonized by the abuser. And it's very hard to act in an empowered way in that kind of situation. Degrading is not simply nastiness. It's not the kind of, nastiness that couples may have occasionally if they're angry at each other. Degrading in a coercive control relationship is much worse because the isolation increases the vulnerability. If my partner says something to me one day and it makes me unhappy, well, I have friends, I have coworkers, it's okay. It wasn't the best conversation, but I can get through it. But somebody who's isolated by coercive control is very vulnerable to their partner's degradations and humiliations. It's one way. It's not like a back and forth kind of conversation, it's domination through degradation, or degradation is one of the tactics of domination. It can be very severe or very frequent. And it's not just when the abuser is mad. The abuser uses degradation to suppress conflict and to restrict their partner's freedom. For instance, you look disgusting. You're going to go out like that? Don't go out like that. Nobody's going to want to look at you. Well, when somebody hears that enough, they may stop going out. And then they're even more subject to the abuser's control. So how can you counteract degradation? Just show support and appreciation. As your friend or your family member looks at you and tries to figure out who they are, reflect back their positive self. You can say things like, oh, one thing I've always liked about you, or I admire how you, I love it when you have such a great, whatever it is. Reflect back real things that you appreciate about the person, and they will sink in and they'll counteract the degradation they have in their relationship. Avoid criticizing or blaming them, even for choices around their relationship. You may think you know how they should solve their life situation, but they know more about their life than you do. Economic control is another tactic, of course, of control. Maybe the victim cannot work or is forced to turn over their paycheck. They may be the only person working, but they don't have access to that money. They may be put on an allowance. Money may be used to threaten them or reward them or punish them. If you're a good girl, then I'm going to let you drive the car. If you're not a good girl, then you have to walk everywhere. That would be a form of economic control. If you're good, I'll buy you clothes. If you're not good, you have to go without sanitary products for your period. The abuser may ruin their credit. So if they try to get away, they discover they can't rent an apartment, can't get a light bill in their name. They may steal from them directly. Very often you'll see a victim pay for the abuser's schooling or equipment or car or to set up a business, and they're supposed to get repaid, but they're never repaid. So they're bankrupted by the relationship. How can you counteract economic control? By providing resources. Ask what they need. You may not yourself be able to provide everything, but you may be able to help them hook up with agencies that can. Do they need money, food, childcare? I knew a woman who said that she put her children on a list for subsidized childcare, and the moment they were accepted, she left her abuser, their father. But she knew that she wouldn't be able to hold a job unless she got reliable and affordable childcare for her children. Do they need somewhere for their pets to stay? They feel like they can't leave their abuser because they can't leave their pets behind. Maybe they need help getting a job, a place to store their belongings. People can be very attached to things like photo albums or things that their deceased loved ones gave them. Do they need a place to live? Transportation, maybe information. Maybe you can provide them with information on coercive control if you can do it in a way that you can be sure that won't put them at risk, and let them tell you about that. Don't make promises that you can't keep. And you don't need to provide everything alone. There may be agencies that can help. In the US, Free From is an agency which helps domestic violence victims with economic issues. In the UK, Surviving Economic Abuse does the same. In many countries, it could be churches or other religious institutions that provide that kind of support. Connect them with professional resources if they want them. Maybe helplines. Perhaps they can't call from their own phone, but maybe they could call from your phone or a burner phone and just start a conversation about domestic violence or coercive control. They don't have to commit to leaving or anything, but just begin to have a conversation. Maybe you can accompany them to a domestic violence agency to help them develop a safety plan and meet with an advocate. You probably should not be in the room while they're meeting with the advocate, but you could bring them there, and just your presence as they go there could help them calm their fears. Maybe accompany them to the police if that's the kind of intervention that they want. Provide contact information for a therapist who understands coercive control and domestic violence. And not all therapists do. And it's very important that someone who's being coercively controlled not participate in couples therapy. It can really put them at risk. They're not free to speak in the session, and they may be punished when they get home for things they said in the session. The fifth tactic that I want to talk about is trapping through acts of love. And emphasis here is on acts of love. Sometimes coercively controlling relationships have moments that feel very, very loving, very romantic. If it was all bad from the very beginning, the person would never have gotten into the relationship. So sometimes the abuser can be very charming in the beginning and will turn on the charm when they think it's the best tactic. So maybe when threatening and being physically violent isn't working and the victim is getting ready to leave, the abuser will take out the wedding album, or will give them flowers, or will take them out to dinner, or will make love very tenderly. And that reels the victim back in. Abusers act affectionate and romantic to keep their partner in the relationship. I like to think of it as a tactic. So I don't find the cycle of violence very helpful. If you do, that's fine, and you can continue to use it. I prefer to think about these acts of love, what some people call the honeymoon part of the cycle, as being a tactic. So an abuser has like a toolbox of things they use. All the tactics we're talking about: isolation, manipulation, controlling through money, controlling the children, and acting loving is one of those tactics. And the abuser will use it when they think that that's the best way to keep the victim in the relationship. In the beginning, often abusers are so romantic, and the person who is later subjected to abuse feels loved and understood as they've never felt before, so supported, and it just feels wonderful. But over time, they have to work really hard to get into that warm glow of love. They work so hard to get it back because it did feel so good in the beginning. So how can we counteract that love story? I think it's important to listen to it and honor it. Don't discount it. Don't say, don't tell me about how loving she is or how loving he is. I don't want to hear it. Listen to it. You can say things like, that must feel great when it's like that. That sounds like your relationship is just amazing at times. And then if it feels okay, you can probe that a little bit. What percentage of your relationship is okay versus is great versus okay versus terrible? Maybe keep track of that. Have the person just make a little check or an X in their appointment book or in their phone without saying what it is, to really get a sense so they can begin to really keep track of how many good days are there. If it feels okay, you can gently share your worries. I saw you looking at your partner with fear. You seem like a different person these days. You seem more timid. What do you think this will look like in a year or in 5 years or in 10 years? You can ask, do you have signs that it's getting better or worse? But again, it's most important to stay in contact and be supportive. That's more important than pushing the person in any direction. They don't need to be pushed by anybody else. They're already being pushed by the abuser. A friend and colleague of mine, Laura Miller, and we wrote an article together, said that she was able to leave a coercive control relationship when she began to think of everything as being poison or bait. So when the person was being hostile, nasty, perhaps violent, that was clearly poison. But when they were being loving and warm and romantic, she began to see that as bait, as something being used to pull her in and keep her in the relationship. And once she was able to see those loving acts as just bait, she didn't fall for them anymore and was able to get away. Sixth tactic we're going to talk about is physical violence. Often the physical violence in coercive control is mild but frequent. So, pushing them out of bed in the morning, slapping when they say something wrong, grabbing their arms rough, shaking them, pulling their hair, rough sex. By mild, I don't mean that it's not important. It's really important. By mild, I just mean it's the kind of thing that somebody usually does not report to the police. Or if they do, the police often do not take seriously. But living with this day in, day out leads to an intense amount of fear. And coercive control can exist without physical violence as well. The physical violence can be very confusing to somebody who's been victimized. The victim may feel like they're responsible. They may also see, oh, well, he only does it when he's drunk, or he only does it when he's high. And therefore it's not really him. And I like to emphasize it's always a choice. Being physically violent is a choice every single time. So how do you counteract physical violence? You can convey that there's really no acceptable reason to hit one's partner. So if your friend says, oh, it was because I was getting on him about his drinking or his not washing the dishes, and that's why he smacked me. You say, no, it was his choice to smack you. There are a lot of ways to respond to somebody saying something that you might not like. Recognize that what they've been through is frightening or terrifying, and you can say that sounds really terrifying, that sounds really frightening, that sounds really dangerous. You can comment on them if you see signs of fear, or if you see bruises or other signs of violence, maybe a hole in the wall or a screen door punched in or kicked in. You can comment on them, broken things that are broken around the house. Those are threats. Broken objects are threats. Certain things indicate higher lethality. For instance, the use of weapons or threat of weapons or access to guns, extreme jealousy or control, strangling, which people often describe as, he put his hands on my neck or he choked me. Any interfering with somebody's breathing is a sign of high lethality and may result in homicide. And you can convey that, that is a really dangerous thing. What just happened to you is really dangerous. And I love you and I don't want you to end up dead. Encourage them to develop a safety plan with a domestic violence advocate. Now, if you live in a country that doesn't have domestic violence advocates, you can find safety plans online in several different languages that they can fill in or just think about what they need to do to get away safely. Don't insist on discussing the physical violence. If the person doesn't want to talk about it with you, that's fine. You're available to talk about it at another point if they decide to. The seventh tactic that we're going to look at is sexual violence, and sexual violence and coercion can take many forms. Most sexual assaults happen within relationships. It's not the stranger on the street, it's somebody who the victim knows, and often their intimate partner. Sexual violence is a potent form of domination. Oh, honey, I just lost control. I didn't know what I was doing. Even during sexual acts, the person knows what they're doing. They're making the choice to lean too hard, to push too hard, to grab somebody by the neck, to push the person into acts they don't want. They know what they're doing. Those are choices. We can convey that the person doesn't lose the right to say no just because you're married or living together, or because they said yes last time. Because the partner is paying the bills, they don't get to do whatever they want. A partner who wants proof of love or threatens to blackmail the person, that's a form of sexual violence. Recording acts against somebody's will or threatening to share photographs or videos, those are all forms of violence. How can we counteract sexual violence? It's really hard to talk about. Frequently, people don't want to talk about it with friends and family or even professionals. Sometimes professionals have difficulty talking about it or hearing it. You may see bruising on the arms. That could be a sign of sexual violence. You can also say things that acknowledge that things may be happening that they don't want to talk to you about. I know things can happen that are hard to talk about. I'm here. Don't insist that people talk about things that are too difficult to discuss. If they have a safe place to keep information, share it with them. What is sexual violence? What is marital rape? Or just talk about it if they don't have a safe place to keep it, if they're comfortable talking about it. Sometimes I'll say, you don't have to say anything, but would you like me to talk a little bit about what sexual violence is? And people appreciate that. People get confused by sexual violence. They may feel like, well, they consented to getting slapped on the bottom. So when it got rougher, had they consented to that? That may be confusing. Or maybe they feel aroused even though they did not consent, or they consented to playing a game, and often sexual violence can be wrapped in this wrapper of this is a lifestyle that we have when there's not true consent. And that's very confusing and hard to sort out. There's a great deal we did not talk about today. We didn't talk about stalking, threats, manipulating through the children, legal issues, cultural issues. We didn't really talk about gender, which is huge, and intersectionality, the ways that race and culture and social class, gender identity, sexual orientation, ableism, ability can intersect with coercive control and domestic violence. And those are definitely topics we should look at another day. I hope you'll consider taking a look at my book, Invisible Chains, Overcoming Coercive Control in Your Intimate Relationship. It's available in paper and electronic versions, in English, 2 forms of Chinese and Spanish, and I'd love to have it translated into other languages as well. Being coercively controlled by a partner is confusing because it's a partner, it's a relationship that's supposed to have love. It's lonely. It's extremely damaging, and your support as a family member or friend can help so much. In summary, stay in touch no matter what it takes. Validate the person. It's so difficult. It's confusing. It's painful what you're going through. Reflect back to them their positive qualities. Know that worse things have happened than what they are willing to tell you. Know that it takes time to separate, and it also takes time to heal. So don't expect the person to be back to normal right after they separate from the relationship. And it's also possible they'll go back, and it may take a few tries before they're able to separate. Provide resources, including resources on coercive control, but also practical resources regarding housing and food and so on. Be patient and non-judgmental as you stay in touch. Remember, staying in touch is most important. Help them connect with a domestic violence advocate or develop a safety plan if there are no advocates in your community. And don't push too hard. It won't work, and it will drive them away. They're already being pushed by their intimate partner, their abusive partner. There's a great deal more that I could say. I do have a blog on psychologytoday.com called Invisible Chains, and there are quite a few pieces there on coercive control. There's my website and my email address. I do look forward to hearing from you. And let me just take a couple of questions. There's a question here about the effects of coercive control on children. Someone who coercively controls their partner is not going to be a good parent. It's not like they're 2 different people, one person with their partner and another person with their children. At some point, the controlling, invasive, violent, and inappropriate tactics that they're using with their partner are also going to be used with their children. And this is something that we're increasingly educating judges about. And Emma Katz and Evan Stark are taking the lead in this quite a bit. I also testify in cases, as do some other people in custody cases, so judges can understand what it means for someone who's a domestic abuser to have custody of their children, and the ways in which they can sometimes manipulate this as another form of abuse over their partner, their ex-partner. I think we're going to leave it there for now. So thank you very much for participating in this webinar, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you ever so much, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you very much, Lisa, for doing this webinar for us. If any of you have any questions, and especially those who are going to watch the recordings of this webinar, please do get in touch with us. My email address and Twitter handle is available here, and please do get in touch and we can take it from there. Please also subscribe to the channel and like the video if you would like to be notified for further videos about the topic.